30 minutes after the church bells stopped echoing through the winter air, I stood alone beside my husband's casket, and the one truth I had kept buried for nearly 2 years suddenly became the weapon someone else was ready to use against me. I did not expect the world to tilt beneath my feet on the very day I said goodbye to the only man who had ever protected me. Yet that is exactly what happened. My name is Elaine Mercer, I am 49 years old, and the day I buried my husband, Caleb, was the same day I discovered how fragile a woman's peace can be when others smell even the faintest trace of weakness. I was still touching the polished mahogany of the casket when a shadow fell across the snow-covered ground. For a moment, I thought grief was playing tricks on my mind. But when I turned, the chill that rushed through me had nothing to do with the cold weather. It was Vivian, my son's new wife. Her heels sank into the soft ground, her black coat too elegant, her expression too calm for someone attending her father-in-law's funeral. But it was the man standing beside her, a stranger with a briefcase and sharp eyes, that made my stomach tighten. I had seen enough of life to recognize danger even when no one said a word. Vivian offered me a small smile that felt like the blade of a knife wrapped in silk. "Elaine," she whispered, "we need to talk." I looked at her hands, perfectly manicured, no tremble, no sadness, and I realized she had not come to mourn. She had come prepared. 2 years before Caleb died, he had quietly shifted everything he owned into a private trust and placed my name as the sole beneficiary. 15 years of disciplined saving from his business, nearly $5 million, all tucked behind layers of protections he said were for my safety. Caleb knew people could be wolves disguised as family, and he sensed something long before I did. His final warning to me echoed in my mind every night after he passed: do not trust easily, especially not the ones who arrive smiling. I kept the inheritance secret, believing silence would guard me. I told no one, not even my son, Daniel. But secrets rarely stay buried, and the moment I saw the lawyer at Vivian's side, I knew she had found a way inside a world that was never meant for her. The funeral ended in a blur. Friends embraced me, neighbors offered condolences, but my eyes kept drifting toward Vivian as she whispered instructions to the lawyer, her tone sharp enough to cut through the cold. Daniel stood between them with a confused frown, unaware of the storm quietly forming around him. He loved Vivian with a blind devotion I once found charming but later feared. I hoped this moment was just a misunderstanding, a coincidence, anything but what my intuition whispered. When the last guests drifted away, Vivian stepped closer, her perfume too sweet, her voice too steady. "Elaine," she said softly, "I think it's time we discussed Caleb's financial matters." My heart hammered so loudly I could feel it against my ribs. Only 3 people in the world knew about the inheritance: me, Caleb, and our lawyer, Harold Stockton. There was no reason Vivian should know anything. She should not have had access to bank files, trust documents, or estate data. But she worked at a financial institution, and suddenly it became clear. She had used her position to search. She had used her marriage to Daniel as her key. I forced a smile. "Today isn't the day for that," I said gently. "This is a funeral." The lawyer at her side cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mercer, we represent Daniel's interests. There are legal concerns regarding the estate." My breath caught. Legal concerns? Vivian's hand slipped through Daniel's arm as if she owned every part of him, body and soul. "Daniel just wants fairness," she said sweetly. "You understand, don't you?" I understood far too well. She wanted money, Caleb's money, the money he left me because he feared exactly this moment. I looked at my son. His eyes were tired, overwhelmed, but trusting. Trusting the wrong person. The drive home after the funeral was one of the longest of my life. Snowflakes blurred against the windshield, mirroring the haze in my mind. The world around me felt colder, heavier, as if someone had pulled a dark curtain over the future I thought I still had. When I reached the house, silence greeted me. Caleb had filled every room with laughter, warmth, the smell of coffee, the hum of his favorite jazz records. Now the air felt hollow, as if grief itself had taken residence. I walked to his study, sat in his old leather chair, and let my fingers trace the wooden desk where he had drafted his will a year before his illness worsened. The envelope was still there, sealed, untouched, the one he told me to open only if necessary. I had never dared. But the presence of Vivian's lawyer at the funeral changed everything. I broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside, Caleb's handwriting stretched across the page, bold, steady, unmistakably his. If anyone tries to pressure you, call Richard. Trust him. And do not let fear silence you. Richard was a retired attorney, Caleb's closest friend, and the only person he believed had the integrity to protect me if the world turned cruel. I closed my eyes. Caleb had sensed danger years before I could see it. That night, Daniel called. "Mom," he began, voice uncertain, "Vivian said there might be issues with Dad's estate. Maybe we should talk, all three of us." I heard the hesitation, the conflict, the faint echo of the boy I raised, but the shadow of the woman beside him dimmed his sincerity. I kept my tone calm. "We can talk soon," I said gently. "But give me time, sweetheart. Today has already taken enough out of me." Before he could answer, Vivian's voice whispered something in the background. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Okay, but she just wants what's fair." The call ended. I sat alone in the dim light of Caleb's study, listening to the clock tick slowly toward midnight. Everything felt wrong. Vivian had chosen the funeral deliberately, when I was at my weakest, when grief softened the edges of my defenses. I placed Caleb's letter back into the drawer. Then I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered for a long moment before dialing the number I had hoped I would never need. When Richard Hale answered, his voice was firm, clear, and steady, like the first light after a storm. "Elaine," he said. "I've been expecting your call." And just like that, I knew the real battle was only beginning. When I arrived at Richard Hale's office the next morning, dawn had barely lifted above the skyline, yet the weight in my chest felt heavier than the winter clouds pressing over the city. His building was old, 3 floors of brick that had survived storms, lawsuits, and time itself, just like the man who waited for me inside. Richard had been Caleb's closest friend for more than 20 years, a man known in legal circles not for aggression but for precision. He fought with documents, not outbursts, and he won by revealing truths others tried desperately to bury. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't waste a single second with empty condolences. Instead, he motioned toward the wooden chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said gently, "and tell me everything." I told him what happened at the funeral, every detail, from the slippery sweetness of Vivian's voice to the cold efficiency of the lawyer she had brought. With each sentence, Richard's expression hardened. When I finished, he leaned back, folded his hands, and exhaled a slow, deliberate breath. "Elaine," he said, "Caleb was right to be cautious. You're in the middle of a trap." I swallowed, my throat tight. Why would she want Caleb's money? Richard's brow lifted as if the answer was obvious. Because she knew about it long before Caleb died. Because she used her job to dig into accounts that were never hers. Because she married your son for access, not love. The words hit me like cold water. I had sensed something about Vivian even before the wedding, the way she measured rooms the moment she entered, the way she observed conversations like she was studying investment charts, the way she smiled without warmth. But I blamed my uneasiness on change, on the fear of losing Daniel to adulthood, not on the possibility that he had married a woman with a long-term strategy instead of a long-term heart. Richard opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "There are things you need to see," he said calmly. Inside were printouts, bank access logs, employment records, background reports, things Caleb must have shared with Richard before he fell too ill to fight his own battles. I skimmed the first page and felt my stomach twist. "She accessed the trust file," I whispered. Richard nodded. "Many times. She tracked the balance, the transfers, the asset growth. She knew everything." I pressed a hand against my lips, trying to stop the tremble in my breath. "Daniel doesn't know." "Of course he doesn't," Richard replied. "People like Vivian operate in silence. They hide their motives behind affection." He paused. "Your son is loyal, but loyalty can be dangerous when placed in the wrong hands." That sentence stayed with me long after I left his office. By afternoon, the first blow arrived. A letter. A legal notice. Delivered by courier, addressed to Elaine M. Mercer, with the cold, clinical formality of a threat disguised as paperwork. They were challenging the trust, claiming I had manipulated Caleb in his final year, claiming the assets should be considered marital property and distributed fairly. Reading those words made my blood run cold. Vivian had crafted her strategy with the precision of a surgeon, attacking not just my finances but my integrity, my marriage, my memories. I sat in my living room staring at the papers until the clock struck 5, each tick drilling deeper into my spine. I heard Caleb's voice in my mind again, "Be careful who stands close when you're grieving. Not everyone grieves with you." As evening settled, I realized I needed to speak to Daniel before Vivian twisted the narrative even further. I drove to their apartment with a heart full of dread, rehearsing what to say. When Daniel opened the door, he looked exhausted, like someone stretched thin between loyalty and confusion. "Mom," he said quietly, "Vivian thinks you're hiding something." I stepped inside and chose my words carefully. "Daniel, your father made decisions years before he got sick. He acted to protect me, not to hurt you." He rubbed his temples. "But why didn't you tell me?" "Because Caleb was afraid someone would use him to get to me. Because I never imagined my son would be married to someone who saw value only in dollar signs. Because he was my child, not my confidant, and I wanted to shield him, not burden him, but I only said, because he asked me not to." Before Daniel could respond, Vivian entered the room. Her makeup flawless, her smile gentle, too gentle. "Elaine," she said sweetly, "we're not trying to attack you. We just want transparency." "Transparency?" I repeated. "Is that why you brought a lawyer to my husband's funeral?" Her smile flickered. "We thought it was best to address things quickly." "Quickly?" The word burned on my tongue. "You waited until the casket was still in the ground." Daniel stepped between us. "Mom, please. Let's talk calmly." But Vivian wasn't interested in calm. I saw the shift in her eyes, the calculation, the subtle tightening of her jaw. She turned to Daniel and wrapped her arm around his. "She's stressed," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "Grief makes people defensive." The manipulation was as clear as glass. I straightened my spine. "Daniel, I love you. But I won't discuss this with lawyers present unless my own attorney is there." Vivian's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She had expected me to bend. Instead, I walked out before she had the chance to twist the knife. My hands were shaking as I reached my car, but I refused to cry. Not yet. The real breaking point came later that night when my neighbor, Claire, called. Her voice trembled. "Elaine. I don't know if I should tell you this, but rumors are spreading." "Rumors?" I whispered. "Vivian's been talking to people," Claire continued. "She said Caleb changed his will under pressure. She's implying you influenced him. Some people are starting to wonder if," she trailed off, unable to finish. But I knew what she meant. If I had manipulated my dying husband, something inside me fractured. I sat in my kitchen long after the call ended, staring at the faint reflection of myself in the dark window. The woman looking back at me didn't resemble the wife Caleb cherished. She looked older, smaller, more tired than I had ever seen her. For the first time since his death, the weight of being without him settled fully on my shoulders. That was the night I made a promise. I would not allow a woman driven by greed to rewrite the story of my marriage. I would not allow her to turn my son into a weapon. I would not let the legacy Caleb left, the one meant to protect me, be twisted into something sinister. I picked up the phone and dialed Richard. "Prepare everything," I said. "All right," he replied steadily. "From this moment on, we play offense." The next morning began with a silence so heavy it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I stood at the kitchen counter gripping a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, trying to steady my nerves before the storm I knew was coming. Richard had told me to expect escalation. People like Vivian never retreated after making their first move. They pressed harder, even when they knew they were wrong. I had barely taken a sip when the doorbell rang. Not once, but twice. Sharp. Impatient. I already knew it wasn't a friend. Friends knocked. Enemies rang. I opened the door carefully, and there she stood, a woman I had never seen before, tall, stiff, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit that screamed corporate litigation. She handed me another envelope, her expression flat, emotionless. "Ms. Mercer?" she asked. I nodded. "You've been served." Those words felt like a blade dragged across my ribs. Before I could ask a single question, she was already walking back down my porch, heels clicking like a metronome to my panic. I closed the door with trembling hands and slid my thumb under the seal of the envelope. Inside was a formal lawsuit, not just a challenge to the trust but a full-blown accusation claiming I had exerted undue influence, falsified documents, and misappropriated assets that should rightfully belong to the surviving family line through Daniel Mercer and his wife, Vivian Mercer. I sank onto the nearest chair, my breath shallow. It was worse than I had imagined. Worse even than Richard had suggested. Vivian didn't simply want Caleb's estate, she wanted my reputation, my name, the foundation of my life. She wanted to destroy me so thoroughly that resistance would seem impossible. I pressed a hand against my chest as a tremor ran through me. I had been a widow for only a matter of days, not even enough time to pack away Caleb's shirts or learn how to sleep on one side of the bed, and already I was being recast as a villain. A manipulator. A thief. The injustice burned so fiercely that tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I reached for the phone and called Richard. He answered on the first ring. "Is it the lawsuit?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. "They're escalating." "Bring it to my office," he said. "Today." "And, Elaine, don't panic. They're overplaying their hand." But panic was already tightening its grip around my lungs like a fist. When I arrived at his office, he read through the documents slowly, meticulously, marking pages with colored tabs. With each flip, his jaw tightened. "This isn't just aggressive," he said finally. "It's reckless." "Because it's all lies," I said, my voice cracking. "Exactly," he replied. "And reckless lies are easier to dismantle than careful ones." His confidence should have comforted me, but fear still curled cold and persistent in my stomach. "They claimed Caleb changed the trust because I influenced him," I whispered. "They're suggesting I took advantage of him when he was sick." Richard looked at me with a softness that contradicted his sharp legal instinct. I knew Caleb for more than 2 decades. He wasn't a man who could be manipulated by anyone. Least of all by the person he loved most. His words were kind, but pain still rippled through me. Losing my husband had already carved a hole in my heart, now Vivian was dragging that loss through mud. Richard leaned back, steepled his fingers, and studied me carefully. "Elaine, there's something you need to understand about Vivian," he said. "This isn't her first attempt to exploit someone through marriage or proximity." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned his computer screen toward me, revealing a background report with multiple flagged entries. "She changed her name 3 times in 10 years, he said calmly. 2 short marriages, both ending with financial disputes. A string of relationships with men significantly older than she was. Lawsuits. Complaints. Suspicious account activity at multiple jobs." I stared at the screen, my mouth slightly open. Why didn't Daniel know any of this? Because people like her hide their past the same way they hide their intentions, behind charm and timing. There it was again, the realization that the woman my son had married was not who she pretended to be. Richard clicked on another tab. "There's more," he said. "I've asked a colleague to look deeper. We'll get everything we need." Relief flickered in my chest, but only for a moment. "And what about the lawsuit?" I asked. "We'll respond through the court," he said. Firmly. "And in the meantime, do not talk to Vivian. Do not argue with her. And most importantly, do not let her provoke you. She's already isolating me," I whispered. "People are hearing her version of the story." Richard nodded. "Then we'll give them the truth. But we do it the right way, legally, strategically, and without losing control." As I left his office, the air outside felt colder than usual, the sky darker despite the early hour. I drove home fighting the urge to cry, but by the time I reached my driveway, tears were already running down my cheeks. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, trembling, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. My phone buzzed in my bag. A message from Daniel. "Mom, can we talk later? Viv is upset. She thinks you're making things complicated." I closed my eyes as a wave of heartbreak rolled through me. He wasn't choosing her over me, not consciously, but influence doesn't need awareness to work. The seed she planted in him was already growing. That evening, the situation worsened. The neighbor who had always greeted me with warmth avoided eye contact when she passed my yard. Another crossed to the opposite sidewalk. By sunset, whispers had begun circulating, subtle, but unmistakably pointed. Caleb's death, the trust, Mike's suspicious behavior. Vivian had unleashed a campaign against me so efficiently that half the neighborhood was already leaning toward suspicion. I wanted to shout, to defend myself, to shake the truth into anyone who would listen. But Richard's warning repeated in my head, let her talk. Lies spread fast, but they also unravel fast when confronted with facts. Still, the loneliness hit like a punch. I walked into my empty home and felt the walls closing in, the silence thick and suffocating. This was the first time I truly understood the danger of grieving in the presence of a predator. Because while you're weak, they're hungry, I steadied myself and lit the small candle I kept next to Caleb's photo. The flame flickered, soft and warm, illuminating his smile in the frame. "I miss you," I whispered, tracing the air near his cheek. "And I'm trying. I promise I'm trying." The flame wavered, then steadied again, and something inside me did the same. As long as I had breath, I would not let Vivian rewrite the truth. I would not let her dismantle the life I had built with Caleb. And I would not let her consume my son the way she consumed everything else in her path. The battle had begun and I would not lose. The next morning I woke to a soft drizzle tapping against the window, a sound that should have calmed me, but instead it reminded me of how small and exposed I felt. I brewed a pot of strong coffee and sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the papers Richard had prepared overnight. Each document, each notarized signature, each bank statement, felt like armor. I had spent hours the night before memorizing the details, every clause of the trust, every exception Caleb had included, every bit of evidence showing Vivian's manipulations. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed to feel ready because the court date was only days away, and I could not let fear dictate my actions. By mid-morning, a knock on the door startled me. I froze, holding a cup of coffee with shaking hands. Through the peephole, I saw a familiar face, Martha. My neighbor had become my confidant, a silent strength in the past weeks. She had come with a folder under her arm, eyes serious, lips pressed tightly together. "Elaine," she said softly as I opened the door, "I found something that might help you." I invited her in, my heart thudding with cautious hope. She placed the folder on the table and slid it toward me. "These are all receipts, emails, and private messages from Vivian over the past 6 months. She's been coordinating with her family, and some of these messages, well, they're damning." My fingers trembled as I flipped through the pages, my eyes widening at the level of deceit. There were clear instructions from her mother about how to pressure Daniel, messages detailing the timing of inheritance announcements, even screenshots where Vivian called my son naive and the perfect mark. I felt my chest tighten and then release in a bitter laugh. I had suspected manipulation, but seeing it so plainly was both horrifying and, oddly, empowering. Martha's hand rested lightly on mine. "I know this hurts," she said, "but now you have proof. We can use this in court." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Proof, finally, in a world where everyone had started believing Vivian's version of the story. I arranged the documents carefully, making mental notes about how to present each piece. I would not let emotion override logic, this battle required both. That evening, Daniel called. I let the phone ring twice before answering. "Mom," he said, voice hesitant, "Vivian says you're trying to hide everything from me." His tone was not angry, but conflicted. I took a deep breath. "Daniel, I am protecting you. I am protecting what your father wanted. That is not hiding, it is safeguarding. Silence followed. I could almost hear the thoughts racing in his head. I don't know, he said finally, voice cracking. She says I can't trust you. You know me, I replied softly. You know who I am. Don't let anyone else's words make you doubt that. The line went quiet, and I felt a pang of helplessness. But I also felt the stirrings of resolve. I had to be patient. Daniel had to see the truth for himself, and rushing him could push him further into Vivian's influence. I hung up and stared at Caleb's photograph across the room, drawing strength from his familiar smile. We will fix this, I whispered. We will survive this. The days leading up to the hearing were tense. I barely slept, haunted by visions of courtrooms, aggressive lawyers, and a son torn between loyalty and manipulation. Richard worked tirelessly, preparing opening statements, cross-examinations, and evidence summaries. He arranged meetings with witnesses who could testify to Caleb's intentions and Vivian's previous manipulations. One afternoon, we met with a retired lawyer who had once worked with Caleb. He affirmed Caleb's careful planning of the trust and the intent behind the protective clauses. Each confirmation built a fortress around me, each fact a shield against Vivian's accusations. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed with meticulous care. A charcoal gray suit, black heels, hair neatly tied, pearls that Caleb had given me, a uniform of strength. I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized. Not the grieving widow who had cried herself to sleep for days on end, but someone resolute, someone prepared to fight with every ounce of her being. Richard's voice came through in my mind, stay calm. Speak clearly. Present the facts. Let the truth do the rest. I took a deep breath, letting it settle in my chest like a promise to myself. The courthouse smelled of old paper, polished wood, and anxious energy. People moved briskly, whispering, shuffling papers, eyes darting nervously. I saw Daniel from a distance, standing stiffly beside Vivian. She looked immaculate, her composure intact, a perfect mask of confidence. But I knew the cracks were there, the truth had a way of surfacing when least expected. Richard squeezed my hand briefly. Ready? He asked. I nodded, swallowing hard. As ready as I'll ever be. The judge entered, a woman in her early 50s with a commanding presence. Her gaze swept over the room with calm authority. We are here regarding the estate of Mr. Caleb Mercer, she said. The court's goal is to ensure that the wishes of the deceased are honored, and that disputes are resolved justly. She paused, looking at me. Mrs. Elaine Mercer, are you willing to discuss a settlement? I shook my head slightly. No, Your Honor, I said firmly. I wish to present my evidence. Vivian's eyes rolled imperceptibly, but her jaw tightened, betraying the irritation beneath her composed surface. Richard began presenting documents, Caleb's notarized will, the protective clause specifying Daniel's limited access if married to someone with financial motives, and supporting affidavits. He laid each item carefully on the table, explaining its relevance and legality. I watched Daniel's face go pale as Vivian's confident mask faltered. Richard then introduced the damning evidence Martha had found, messages detailing Vivian's plans, emails coordinating her moves, and prior cases where she had exploited men for their assets. The courtroom fell silent. Vivian's lawyer protested, but Richard countered each objection smoothly, citing authenticity, notarization, and legal precedents. When Richard played the audio recording of Vivian and her mother discussing the plan to pressure me and secure the assets, the room became almost unbearably still. Daniel's head sank into his hands. Vivian's face lost color, her composure cracking as the weight of her own words came back to confront her. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the documents. Finally, she spoke. The court finds that Ms. Vivian Mercer acted with deliberate intent to manipulate and exploit for financial gain. The protective clause in Mr. Caleb Mercer's trust is valid and enforceable. Daniel Mercer shall receive only a portion of the inheritance as specified, under the lifetime management of Mrs. Elaine Mercer. Vivian's face twisted in disbelief. She shouted accusations of conspiracy, but the judge struck her down with authority. She was removed from the courtroom shortly after, struggling against her handlers, still screaming. Daniel slumped into the nearest chair, silent, overwhelmed by guilt and relief. I approached him slowly, unsure if he could bear to look at me. He lifted his head, eyes red, brimming with tears. "Mom. I'm so sorry," he whispered. I knelt beside him, taking his hands in mine. "You have nothing to apologize for, Daniel," I said softly. "You were misled. That is not your fault. But we will rebuild. Together." He clung to me, and I realized that for the first time in weeks, the fear, the anger, the helplessness began to dissolve. Justice had been served, but more importantly, truth had prevailed. For now, at least, the battle was won, and I had my son back. After the hearing, as we walked out into the pale afternoon sun, I felt the weight lift slightly. Daniel squeezed my hand tightly. "Mom, I want to make things right," he said quietly. I nodded. "And you will. Brick by brick, we'll restore trust, and you'll learn how to protect yourself, just as I had to." We walked together toward the car, the wind carrying away some of the remnants of fear, leaving only the fragile promise of renewal. That night, I sat alone in Caleb's study, the bronze box on the desk before me. I opened it, touching the photograph inside, feeling the warmth of his presence, the legacy of love and protection he had left behind. Tears ran down my cheeks, but they were not only of grief, they were also of relief, of vindication, and of the determination that whatever came next, I would not falter. The war was far from over, but I had learned something crucial. Strength, patience, and truth were weapons far more powerful than deceit. And I was ready to wield them. The morning after the court victory, the sunlight streamed through the living room windows, casting warm, golden stripes across the polished hardwood floor. I sat in Caleb's old leather chair, the bronze box open before me, staring at the photograph inside. His smile, gentle and knowing, seemed to reassure me even now, guiding me through the storm we had just endured. Daniel entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee, his eyes red from the tears he had shed the day before. "Mom," he said softly, placing 1 mug on the side table, I don't even know how to start making this right." I took a sip of the coffee, savoring its warmth, then smiled faintly. "Start by being honest with yourself, Daniel. Accept what happened, and learn from it. That's where the real work begins." For the next few days, we navigated a delicate truce between the remnants of pain and the fragile threads of trust we were trying to rebuild. Daniel returned to his apartment, still distant but reflective, and I threw myself into organizing the house and reviewing every legal document Richard had prepared. I realized that while the court had restored the inheritance to its rightful state, the emotional damage Vivian had caused would take much longer to repair. Every conversation I had with Daniel had to be handled with care, patience, and unwavering calm. Each time he hesitated or faltered, I reminded myself that trust was not reclaimed in a single moment, it was rebuilt brick by brick. Richard visited daily, reviewing strategies for long-term protection and offering counsel on potential obstacles we might face. He reminded me that Vivian could attempt to challenge the decision again, perhaps by filing appeals or trying to tarnish reputations further. "Elaine," he said one afternoon, leaning back in his chair, "this isn't just about winning a case. It's about teaching Daniel, and anyone who depends on you, how to protect themselves. We've secured the estate, but the emotional inheritance, the lessons, the awareness, is equally vital." I nodded solemnly, understanding that his words were as important as any legal advice. Martha continued to be an anchor, providing both practical support and quiet companionship. Together, we cataloged Vivian's previous manipulations, creating a reference binder of her past actions that could be used if she tried to interfere again. She had even gathered testimonies from people who had unknowingly been caught in Vivian's schemes over the years. Each story was a mirror of what could have happened to Daniel, a chilling reflection of the risks that had nearly destroyed our family. I felt a mix of gratitude and anger as I read through them, gratitude for the clarity they provided, anger at the cruel calculations behind them. One afternoon, while reviewing the documents, Daniel returned to the house unexpectedly. He entered hesitantly, holding a small box in his hands. "Mom, I found this in my things," he said, placing it on the table before me. Inside was a delicate necklace that Caleb had once given me, a symbol of his love and care. I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Daniel," I whispered, reaching out to touch the pendant. He looked down, fidgeting with the corners of his sleeve. "I want to make amends. I want to be part of this family again, not just in name, but in action." I smiled faintly, my heart warming despite the lingering ache. "That's all I've ever wanted, Daniel. Presence, honesty, and effort. Everything else can be rebuilt around that." The days blurred into weeks as we worked together, establishing routines, rebuilding trust, and preparing for the next stage, creating something that would transform our pain into purpose. I remembered Caleb's words from months ago, when he had spoken about legacy, not just money, but the impact we leave on lives. Inspired, I began researching ways to support widows like myself, women who had no one to guide them through legal, financial, and emotional challenges. Daniel became an eager participant, helping organize contacts, compiling information, and offering fresh ideas on outreach. His energy, once diverted into confusion and regret, was now channeled into constructive action, and I felt a surge of pride in watching him evolve. One morning, as I sat with a cup of tea, reviewing potential locations for our support initiative, Daniel leaned against the doorway, eyes thoughtful. "Mom, what if we started something more permanent? A center where widows could come for help, counseling, legal guidance, and community?" I looked at him, surprise giving way to a deep, quiet satisfaction. "That's exactly what I've been thinking," I said, a smile breaking across my face. "It won't be easy, but it's necessary. There are so many women out there who have no one, and we can change that." Over the next few months, we threw ourselves into planning. I located a plot of land that Caleb had once considered for a business expansion, an area large enough to accommodate offices, counseling rooms, and communal spaces. Daniel contributed tirelessly, learning about contracts, zoning regulations, and budgeting, his dedication proving that he had truly absorbed the lessons from our ordeal. We met with architects, discussed layouts, and carefully considered every detail to ensure the center would be welcoming, functional, and a symbol of hope. Each step reinforced the sense of purpose I had been searching for since Caleb's passing. Richard continued to advise us, ensuring that every legal aspect was covered, from property acquisition to nonprofit establishment. He reminded me that this was not just an act of charity, but a protective measure. By formalizing the organization, we could safeguard the initiative against interference from Vivian or anyone like her in the future. Martha helped with community outreach, connecting with women who might need our services, ensuring that our first clients would feel supported, heard, and safe. As the opening day approached, Daniel and I worked side by side, preparing for the first beneficiaries who would walk through our doors. Every detail mattered: the furniture, the legal resources, the schedules for workshops, the counselors, and volunteers. Each small victory felt monumental, a tangible proof that we had turned despair into action. Daniel's confidence grew with every passing day, and I finally began to see the young man I had always hoped he would become: responsible, empathetic, and resilient. On the morning of the official opening, we stood outside the center together, the sunlight reflecting off the windows of the newly painted building. A bronze plaque engraved with Caleb's name glinted in the light, a symbol of legacy, love, and protection. The first women to arrive were greeted warmly, their stories unfolding in quiet, painful conversations. Some had lost husbands, some were fighting for their homes, and some simply needed guidance to navigate a world that had suddenly become hostile. Each interaction reminded me of the fragility of life and the power of support. Daniel stayed by my side, observing, taking notes, and helping wherever needed. "Mom," he said softly during a brief pause, "I understand now. This is why you fought so hard, not just for me, but for everyone who could have been hurt like me." I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Yes, Daniel. Protection is more than law, it's love, and it's action." As the day progressed, laughter, tears, and stories filled the rooms. The center became alive with hope, a sanctuary built from struggle, pain, and determination. As evening fell, I stood alone in the main hall, the bronze box on the reception desk. I touched its surface, remembering the nights of fear, the betrayal, the courtroom battles. The pain had not disappeared, but it had transformed into purpose, into resilience, into a reason to move forward. Daniel approached quietly, standing beside me. "Mom, thank you for not giving up," he said. "You fought for me, for yourself, and now for all of these women." I couldn't be prouder. I smiled, letting the weight of the day settle around me. "We did this together, Daniel." The journey wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And it's only the beginning. We stood there in silence, surrounded by empty rooms that were already filled with promise, each of us understanding that from the darkest moments, a new chapter had begun, one of hope, resilience, and unwavering love. The morning after the center's opening, I woke to the sound of birds singing outside the window, sunlight spilling over the kitchen counter where Daniel was already busy making breakfast. His energy was different now, grounded yet lively, the shadow of the past months replaced by determination. "Mom," he said, placing a plate of scrambled eggs before me, "I stayed up last night thinking about how we can expand this center. There are so many women who could use this, not just in our neighborhood, but in the entire county." I smiled, a warmth spreading in my chest. "I know, Daniel. But we must take it one step at a time. Today is for these women who need us immediately. Tomorrow, we can think about growth." The first day of full operations brought a constant flow of visitors, each story as heartbreaking as the last. Some were recent widows, terrified of losing their homes or being manipulated by in-laws. Others were older, having been isolated for years, unsure how to navigate legal or financial systems. Each person who walked in carried a mixture of fear, hope, and hesitation. I greeted them all personally, offering a gentle smile and a listening ear, remembering how Caleb had always said that presence and attention are more valuable than gold. Daniel shadowed me, learning how to provide comfort without pity, how to offer guidance without taking over. By mid-morning, the first support session began. I led a small group into one of the counseling rooms, a cozy space with soft chairs and warm lighting. The women shared their stories cautiously at first, their voices trembling, eyes glistening with unshed tears. I encouraged them, offering guidance, legal insight, and reassurance. "You are not alone," I said quietly, letting the words resonate in the room. "This is a safe space. Here, you can ask questions, learn, and gain the strength to protect yourselves." A woman named Margaret, around 65, clutched my hand tightly. "I thought I had lost everything," she whispered. "But now, I feel like there's hope again." Her words struck a chord deep within me, echoing all the pain, fear, and struggle that had led us here. Meanwhile, Daniel handled administrative tasks, scheduling appointments, tracking donations, and coordinating volunteers. Watching him work with such diligence, I felt a surge of pride and a twinge of relief. He had been lost in the chaos and betrayal that Vivian had sown, but now he had found his purpose. Every time he offered a kind word to a widow, reassured a client, or solved a logistical problem, I saw the young man who could have been destroyed by deceit now emerging stronger and more empathetic. As the day progressed, I received a call from Richard, who had been monitoring Vivian's activity closely. "Elaine," he said, his tone calm but firm, "Vivian has attempted to contact several people from the courtroom proceedings, spreading misinformation again. Nothing has legal weight, but her network is trying to isolate you socially." I took a deep breath, my hands tightening around the phone. "So, she's not done?" Richard's voice softened. "No, but you are. And you now have a support system that she cannot infiltrate. Keep focused on the center, and don't engage directly. Every step she takes will backfire in time." I hung up, the weight of his words settling over me, but I felt steadier, more resolved. In the afternoon, a young woman named Clara arrived. She was timid, barely meeting my eyes, but her hand shook as she handed over a stack of documents. "My husband," he passed suddenly. "My in-laws want me to sign everything over." "I don't know what to do," she whispered. I gestured for her to sit, and Danielle and I went over each paper with her, explaining her rights, outlining potential legal strategies, and giving her a clear plan of action. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she smiled faintly, relief softening her features. "I never thought anyone would help me," she said. "I felt completely alone. Now I feel like I have a chance." By evening, the energy in the center shifted from the intensity of crisis to quiet reflection. The women left with documents in hand, advice, and a newfound sense of empowerment. Daniel and I sat in the main hall, exhausted but fulfilled. "Mom," he said, stretching and rubbing his eyes, "I didn't realize how much impact a place like this could have. These women, they're walking out with hope. That's worth everything." I nodded, my gaze drifting to the bronze plaque with Caleb's name. "This is why we fought, Daniel. Not for revenge, not for money, but to create something that protects and uplifts. That's the real victory." The following week, I held a planning session with volunteers and staff, laying out the long-term vision. We discussed expanding services to include workshops on financial literacy, navigating legal processes, and emotional resilience. Daniel contributed actively, offering innovative ideas to track cases, provide follow-up support, and integrate technology for broader outreach. His enthusiasm was contagious, and even the older volunteers seemed inspired by the energy and clarity he brought to the discussions. One afternoon, while reviewing donation records, I noticed a familiar name, Vivian. She had donated anonymously through a third party, perhaps attempting to reinsert herself subtly into our lives. I called Richard immediately, who advised caution. "Elaine, this could be a manipulation tactic. We need to monitor it but not respond directly. Let her actions speak for themselves." I felt a surge of frustration, but also clarity. Vivian's attempts to interfere now seemed futile against the foundation we had built, both legally and emotionally. As the weeks passed, Danielle and I began documenting each case, creating manuals and guides for future widows who might need help. Each story we recorded was a reminder of why this center existed. Some women were struggling with property disputes, others with emotional trauma, and a few were facing isolation and loneliness. Every successful resolution, every tear turned into a smile, reinforced the truth I had learned through our own ordeal: protection, knowledge, and support were more valuable than any sum of money. One particularly emotional day, Margaret returned with a small bouquet of flowers. "Elaine, Daniel, I want to thank you properly. You saved me from losing everything, and more importantly, you gave me courage to stand up for myself. I don't feel helpless anymore." I hugged her, feeling the depth of gratitude and relief she expressed. Daniel joined us, his eyes glistening. "Seeing you regain your strength, it's more than I could have imagined." That evening, as I placed the flowers on the reception desk, I realized that each life we touched was a ripple, slowly transforming the world around us. Late one night, after the center was empty, I sat alone in Caleb's old office, the bronze box open on the desk. I traced my fingers over the engraved vines, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here, the betrayal, the courtroom battles, the moments of despair, and the ultimate triumph. I understood now that strength wasn't about holding on to anger or seeking revenge. It was about resilience, purpose, and the ability to rise after being knocked down. Daniel's growth mirrored my own. Together, we had turned tragedy into action, pain into hope. As I closed the box and prepared to leave, Daniel appeared at the doorway. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about the next step. Not just for this center, but for other communities, other towns. There are so many who need what we're offering." I looked at him, a swell of pride and love welling up. "Then we'll keep going. Step by step, we'll expand, we'll teach, we'll protect." That's the legacy Caleb wanted, and now it's ours to carry forward. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of our past transformed into the promise of a future filled with purpose, compassion, and unwavering strength. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the Austin Bennett Widow Support Center, casting warm streaks across the polished floors. I arrived early, as always, carrying a folder of documents and a thermos of coffee. Daniel was already there, reviewing schedules and coordinating with volunteers over the phone. His calm efficiency contrasted sharply with the chaos we had once endured. "Mom, we have 6 new appointments today, plus 3 walk-ins. I've also confirmed a donation from the local law firm, he said without looking up. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and pride. The center had grown faster than I ever imagined, yet every new case reminded me why we had fought so fiercely for justice. The first visitor of the day was a young widow, barely in her 30s. She walked hesitantly into the main hall, clutching a folder of legal papers to her chest. Her name was Lena, and her husband had passed unexpectedly in a car accident just weeks prior. I invited her into a counseling room and asked her to sit. Her voice trembled as she explained her situation. My in-laws, they want me to sell our house. They say it's easier if I just sign everything over. I don't know what to do. I feel trapped. I reached out, holding her hands gently. Lena, you are not alone. We will guide you through every step, help you understand your rights, and ensure that you make decisions with clarity, not fear. As she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, I realized how fragile hope could be, and how vital it was to nurture it carefully. Daniel prepared informational packets for new clients while also helping with administrative questions. He had grown remarkably since the trial and court battles, no longer the boy swayed by manipulation but a man capable of discernment and compassion. Watching him advise Lena, answer questions, and calmly reassure her, I felt a swell of pride. This work was not just about protecting inheritance or assets, it was about giving people back a sense of dignity they had been stripped of. Later that morning, a woman named Margaret returned, accompanied by her teenage granddaughter. Margaret had been one of the first women I helped at the center. She approached me quietly. Elaine, I wanted to bring Clara here. She's been struggling since her father passed, and her stepmother is trying to control everything. I invited them both in, listening as Margaret explained the situation. Clara's eyes were wide, filled with a mix of fear and defiance. I don't want to lose our family home, she said softly. I reassured her, explaining the legal protections and guidance we could offer, and introduced her to our support group that focused on emotional resilience for young women dealing with family pressure. By midday, the energy in the center had shifted from cautious to collaborative. Volunteers were setting up for a legal workshop on inheritance rights, led by one of the lawyers we had retained. The room buzzed with conversation, questions, and the quiet excitement of empowerment. I watched from the doorway as Daniel organized seating and ensured everyone had materials. He caught my eye and smiled, a silent acknowledgement of the journey we had traveled together, from betrayal, confusion, and fear to purpose, determination, and real impact. A few hours later, Richard arrived for a brief consultation. He had been instrumental in our courtroom victories and continued to provide legal insight for complex cases that required careful handling. Elaine, he said as he entered, I've reviewed some recent developments. Vivian has attempted to contact a few of the women who were witnesses in the trial. She's spreading rumors again, hoping to intimidate them. I clenched my jaw but remained composed. Do we respond? I asked. Richard shook his head. No. Let her reveal herself. Every attempt she makes now will be on record, and it will only further prove the pattern of her manipulation. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension ease slightly. Vivian's power was limited now. The truth we had gathered and the foundation we had built were stronger than any scheme she could orchestrate. That afternoon, we held our first group session focused specifically on financial literacy. Many women had been hesitant to engage with money matters, fearing they would be judged or that they lacked understanding. I opened the session with a simple question: how many of you feel confident managing your finances? Almost everyone hesitated, looking at one another. I smiled gently. That's why we're here. Knowledge is protection. Understanding is empowerment. Over the next 2 hours, we discussed budgeting, understanding bank statements, property rights, and strategies for protecting assets from exploitation. The women asked questions, took notes, and shared stories, creating an atmosphere of solidarity. I noticed the transformation in their expressions, the shift from fear and uncertainty to engagement and determination. By late afternoon, I had a quiet moment alone in the counseling room. I opened the bronze box on the desk, feeling the familiar warmth of the photograph inside. It was Caleb's face, calm and reassuring, a reminder that this was why we persisted. Daniel entered quietly, holding 2 cups of tea. "Mom," he said softly, "sometimes I forget how much strength it took for you to get here. I mean, to fight everything, to stand up against Vivian, to rebuild me and yourself." I looked up at him, my heart tightening with love. Strength is not just about fighting, Daniel. It's about choosing to keep moving forward, to create something meaningful, even when it feels impossible. He nodded, absorbing my words with the seriousness of someone who had experienced betrayal and now understood the value of resilience. Evening fell, and the center quieted. The last visitors left with packets of information and reassurances that they were not alone. Daniel and I stayed behind, reviewing appointments for the next day and ensuring the legal documents were properly filed. "Mom," he said suddenly, "I think it's time we start thinking bigger. Not just this city, but surrounding areas. There are women everywhere facing what we've been fighting. We could set up branches, train volunteers, really make a difference." I considered his words, feeling the weight of ambition balanced by practicality. "Yes, Daniel," I said, "but we must be careful. Growth must be deliberate, thoughtful, and sustainable. One step at a time, just like everything else we've done." As I locked up and stepped outside, the cool night air wrapped around me, and I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. We had built more than a center, we had built hope, protection, and empowerment. Daniel walked beside me silently, our hands brushing occasionally, a reminder that the bond broken by deception had been mended stronger than before. I glanced at the empty street, imagining all the women whose lives would be touched in the days, months, and years to come. Every challenge, every tear, every moment of fear had led to this. Before going home, I made one last stop in the main hall, gazing at the bronze plaque engraved with Caleb's name. I whispered, "We did it, my love. We're honoring your legacy, not just in wealth, but in lives changed and strength restored." Daniel joined me, his hand on my shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Mom," he said. I smiled, a quiet, resolute smile, knowing he was right. It was just the beginning. The next morning, the sun rose with a gentle warmth that contrasted sharply with the storm of activity inside the Austin Bennett Widow Support Center. I arrived early, carrying a fresh stack of documents and a thermos of coffee, mentally preparing for a day that promised to be intense. Daniel was already in the main office, reviewing the schedules of volunteers and coordinating with lawyers. He glanced up and smiled, a quiet reassurance that we were moving forward, not just surviving but thriving. Our first visitor was an elderly widow named Grace, her shoulders hunched and hands trembling as she clutched a stack of legal documents. Her late husband had passed unexpectedly, leaving her vulnerable to her stepchildren's pressure. I invited her into a private room, offering her a seat and a calming smile. "Grace, you are not alone. We will walk through every step, ensuring that your rights are protected and that you have the support you need." Her eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "I don't even know where to begin." I guided her gently, explaining the legal documents and her entitlements, the same way Richard had guided me years ago during my darkest battles. While I was speaking with Grace, Daniel was arranging a legal workshop for young widows who had never dealt with property or financial matters. He was patient, methodical, and surprisingly empathetic. Watching him, I remembered how vulnerable he had been, how easily influenced by others. Now, he stood as a pillar of strength, not just for me but for everyone who came seeking guidance. The transformation was profound, and my heart swelled with pride. As the morning passed, more women arrived. One of them, Clara, came with her teenage son, Ethan. Their father had died suddenly, and their lives were being threatened by a manipulative aunt who wanted control over the family home. I listened carefully, taking notes and providing reassurance. "Clara, Ethan, we will make sure your home remains yours. You are not alone, and you have rights that no one can take away without due process." The fear in their eyes gradually softened into hope as I explained the legal avenues and emotional support systems available at the center. By midday, the center was buzzing with activity. Volunteers were preparing informational packets, arranging chairs for upcoming workshops, and fielding phone calls from women seeking guidance. I moved from room to room, offering advice, encouragement, and empathy, sometimes pausing to sip coffee and gather my thoughts. Each woman I helped reminded me why every battle, every tear, and every sleepless night had been worth it. This was more than legal assistance, it was about restoring dignity, protecting inheritance, and, above all, empowering women to stand firm in their lives. Richard arrived for a brief consultation in the early afternoon. His calm presence immediately steadied the atmosphere. "Elaine," he said, "I've received updates regarding Vivian's latest attempts to intimidate witnesses. She's trying to create fear, but it's predictable." I nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and resolve. "Do we need to respond?" I asked. Richard shook his head. "No. Let her actions be recorded. Every attempt she makes to manipulate or intimidate strengthens our case, should anything arise in the future." His words gave me confidence. Vivian's schemes had lost their power, our careful planning and the foundation of evidence we had built ensured that, later, we held a financial empowerment seminar for the widows. Many of the women had avoided dealing with money matters for years, fearing judgment or mistakes. I began the session with a simple question: how many of you feel confident managing your finances? Nearly everyone hesitated, looking around the room nervously. I smiled. That's exactly why we're here. Knowledge is power, and understanding is protection. For 2 hours, we discussed budgeting, bank statements, inheritance rights, and strategies to protect assets from manipulation. Questions flowed freely, and women shared their stories. The energy in the room shifted from uncertainty to determination, from fear to empowerment. As the afternoon wore on, I had a quiet moment alone in my office. I opened the bronze box, feeling the comforting weight of the photograph inside. Caleb's calm, reassuring face reminded me why this work mattered. Daniel entered silently, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Mom," he said softly, "I sometimes forget how much courage it took for you to reach this point. To fight Vivian, to stand up for me, and to rebuild our lives." I looked at him, my heart tightening with emotion. Strength isn't just about fighting, Daniel. It's about choosing to move forward, to create something meaningful, even when fear and doubt linger. He nodded thoughtfully, understanding the depth of those words in a way only someone who had lived through manipulation and betrayal could. Evening fell, and the center slowly quieted. The last visitors left with information packets and renewed hope. Daniel and I reviewed appointments for the following day, ensuring that every legal document was correctly filed and that volunteers were prepared for the next wave of cases. "Mom," he said suddenly, "we should think bigger. Not just in our city, but regionally. There are women everywhere facing these challenges. We could train volunteers, set up branches." I considered his words carefully. "Yes, Daniel, but growth must be deliberate, sustainable, and measured. One step at a time, just as we've done with every victory." Before leaving, I walked through the main hall, pausing to gaze at the bronze plaque engraved with Caleb's name. I whispered, "We did it, Caleb. Every life we touch here is part of your legacy." Daniel joined me silently, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. "This is just the beginning, Mom," he said. I smiled, feeling a profound sense of purpose. It was only the beginning, but we were ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. On the way home, I reflected on the journey. From betrayal and heartbreak to rebuilding trust, confidence, and resilience, every step had brought us here. The center was more than a building, it was a symbol of justice, empowerment, and the enduring strength of a mother who refused to be broken. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet of my home, I opened the bronze box once more. The photograph reminded me that our battles, though painful, had shaped us into who we were meant to be. Daniel's growth, the center's success, and the women we had helped were living proof that perseverance, clarity, and a refusal to surrender could turn even the darkest moments into purpose. I whispered softly to the photograph, "Caleb, we've done more than survive. We've transformed our pain into protection, our fear into empowerment. This is the legacy you wanted, and we are keeping it alive." Daniel appeared in the doorway, a quiet presence, sharing the weight of our successes and the promise of the future. Together, we stood in silence, absorbing the significance of the work we had begun, ready to continue our mission of protection, guidance, and empowerment. The following morning, a chill hung in the air, hinting at the approach of winter. I arrived at the Austin Bennett Widow Support Center earlier than usual, determined to review every case and every document before the women began arriving. Daniel was already there, organizing files and checking schedules, his face calm but focused. Watching him reminded me how far he had come, once timid, easily swayed, and now a young man learning to stand firm in his convictions. Our first appointment was with Lydia, a widow in her 40s whose late husband's business partner was threatening to seize their shared property. She arrived clutching a worn folder, her eyes wide with fear. I welcomed her warmly and guided her into the consultation room. "Lydia, we will make sure your home and your rights are protected. You are not alone, and everything you need to succeed is within reach." As I explained the legal procedures and her options, I could see the tension in her shoulders slowly release. Her voice trembled as she asked questions, and I answered with patience and clarity, just as Richard had once done for me while I was helping Lydia. Daniel coordinated a session in the conference room for younger widows who had little knowledge of finance or inheritance laws. He handled questions with a rare empathy, guiding them through budgeting, safeguarding bank accounts, and understanding legal documents. Their initial hesitation gradually gave way to curiosity, and I could see hope starting to take root in their eyes. The transformation was almost tangible, and I felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that our work extended beyond just legal assistance. It was about restoring dignity and self-confidence. By mid-morning, the center was bustling. Volunteers were arranging chairs, preparing informational handouts, and fielding incoming calls from women desperate for guidance. I moved between rooms, providing advice, encouragement, and sometimes just a listening ear. Each story I heard reminded me of my own past, the fear, the vulnerability, the feeling of being trapped by circumstances beyond my control. It also reminded me of why every tear, every sleepless night, and every moment of courage had been worth it. Then came Margaret, a woman in her 70s whose husband had left her nearly penniless after a lifetime of trust and shared assets. Her late husband's niece was attempting to manipulate her into signing over property, claiming it was for the family's benefit. Margaret sat quietly, clutching her hands in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fight," she admitted. I took her hands gently in mine. "Margaret, fighting isn't about anger or aggression. It's about knowledge, preparation, and support. We will face this together, and you will come out stronger." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of hope, not despair. In the afternoon, I held a seminar on emotional resilience. Many of the women had been traumatized by manipulation, loss, and betrayal. I began with a simple statement: you have already survived the unimaginable. The next step is learning to thrive. We discussed strategies for managing stress, reclaiming autonomy, and building a support network. Women shared their experiences, some sobbing openly, others nodding in quiet agreement. The room was filled with a mixture of grief and strength, a testament to human resilience in the face of adversity. Midway through the seminar, Daniel interrupted gently with a message. One of our more complex cases required immediate attention. A widow named Rebecca was being pressured by her in-laws to sell her home and relinquish control of her husband's estate. I instructed Daniel to continue leading the seminar while I prepared the documents and strategies necessary to support Rebecca. Within 20 minutes, I was on a video call with her, guiding her through the legal steps and offering reassurance. "Rebecca, you have rights, and we will protect them. You are not alone, and we will ensure your voice is heard." By late afternoon, the center had quieted, but the sense of urgency lingered. I sat with Daniel in the main hall, reviewing upcoming cases and discussing strategies for expansion. "Mom," Daniel said thoughtfully, "we're helping so many women, but there are countless others out there facing similar challenges. We could create outreach programs, even online consultations, to reach more widows." I considered his suggestion carefully. "Yes, Daniel, but we must grow responsibly. Every new initiative must maintain the integrity and quality of our support. One step at a time, just as we've done so far." Later, I received a call from Richard. His calm, reassuring voice conveyed important news. Vivian, the manipulative daughter-in-law who had once threatened our family, had attempted to influence a local trustee in a widow's case. Elaine, he said, everything she tries is documented. We have proof that she is acting with intent to manipulate and intimidate. This only strengthens our position should any legal confrontation arise. I thanked him, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and resolve. Vivian's power had been stripped. Every attempt at manipulation now served as evidence against her. That evening, after the last visitors had left, I walked through the empty center, reflecting on the progress we had made. The bronze plaque engraved with Caleb's name gleamed softly in the fading light, a constant reminder of why we had started this work. Daniel joined me silently, his presence a comforting anchor. Mom, he said quietly, I sometimes forget how much courage it took for you to get here. To fight Vivian, to protect me, and to create this center. I looked at him, my heart swelling with pride. Strength, I replied softly, is not just about surviving battles. It's about transforming pain into purpose, fear into action, and loss into empowerment. Later that night, at home, I opened the bronze box, feeling the familiar weight of the photograph inside. Caleb's calm, guiding expression reminded me of the journey we had taken and the work still ahead. Daniel appeared in the doorway, carrying a cup of tea. Mom, he said gently, we've changed lives today. That's what matters. Not the battles we fought, but the lives we protect and empower. I nodded, absorbing his words. Yes, Daniel. Every life touched is proof that our struggles have meaning. Every step forward is a victory for those who cannot fight alone. As I sat alone later that night, I reflected on the transformation that had taken place. From betrayal and heartbreak to the creation of a haven for widows, our journey had been arduous but profoundly rewarding. Daniel's growth, the success of the center, and the lives we had changed were tangible proof that perseverance, strategy, and compassion could turn pain into purpose. Finally, I whispered to the photograph in the bronze box, Caleb, your legacy lives on. Through this center, through Daniel, and through the women whose lives we touch, we are honoring your wisdom and your love. Every obstacle we overcome is a tribute to the strength you instilled in me. Daniel quietly joined me, standing side by side in silence, as we absorbed the significance of our accomplishments and prepared ourselves for the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead. The day ended not with exhaustion but with a profound sense of fulfillment. The center was more than a place, it was a symbol of justice, protection, and the enduring power of resilience. We had built a legacy from the ashes of manipulation, betrayal, and grief. And this legacy would continue, growing stronger with every life we touched, every widow we empowered, and every story we helped rewrite from despair to hope. The first light of dawn streamed through the large windows of the Austin Bennett Widow Support Center, painting the walls with a soft golden hue. I arrived earlier than usual, carrying my notebook and a fresh pot of coffee, ready to reflect on the journey that had brought us here and to plan the next phase of our work. Daniel was already at the reception desk, his expression a mix of excitement and determination as he prepared for the day. Today was different. Today, we were not only helping widows with legal matters, we were expanding our reach, sharing our story with the wider community to empower more people. The first call of the morning came from a widow in another state, whose in-laws had pressured her into selling her family home. She was desperate and exhausted, her voice breaking over the phone. I listened carefully, taking notes, and guided her step by step. You are not powerless, I said firmly. Your rights exist, and we will make sure they are respected. You have the right to protect your home, your dignity, and your inheritance. After the call, Daniel suggested we start recording video sessions to share our lessons and strategies online. I paused, considering the idea. It's time, I said, a mixture of nerves and excitement running through me. If one story can inspire another, if one piece of advice can prevent someone from losing everything, then we must reach beyond these walls. We spent the next hour preparing content, discussing what to say, how to structure the sessions, and what messages were most important. When the first women arrived for consultations, the center was filled with energy and purpose. I guided them through case studies, showing how to recognize manipulation and protect themselves legally and emotionally. Their faces reflected a mix of fear, hope, and determination. Each question they asked reminded me of the battles I had faced with Vivian and how close I had come to losing everything. It also reminded me of the importance of turning personal pain into collective strength. Later, a woman named Caroline came in, her husband having passed suddenly, leaving her with no financial knowledge and hostile family members demanding access to her late husband's estate. She was trembling, clutching a stack of bills and letters, and admitted she had almost given up hope. I held her hands gently. "Caroline, hope is not found in luck. It is found in preparation, guidance, and the courage to stand up for yourself. Today, we will take back what is yours." I guided her through each step of reviewing the legal documents, identifying critical errors in the opposing party's claims, and preparing her responses. By the end of the session, her posture straightened, and she smiled, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "I didn't know I could feel this strong," she whispered. By mid-afternoon, I reflected on the ripple effect of our work. Daniel was leading a small group session for widows learning to manage finances independently, teaching them budgeting, savings, and investment basics. They were learning not only how to survive but how to thrive, gaining confidence that radiated from their faces. I realized that the center was not just about legal protection, it was about self-reclamation, restoring dignity, and teaching resilience. A sudden reminder on my phone brought my attention to a voicemail from Vivian. She sounded desperate and fragile, leaving a message filled with bitterness. "Mrs. Elaine, you destroyed my life. I have nothing left. I hope you are happy." I deleted the message without listening to the rest. For a moment, I reflected on the irony. All her manipulation, her schemes, and her lies had only fueled the strength and purpose of the center. The more she tried to harm others, the more evidence we had to protect future victims. Her loss had become a lesson for many. In the evening, we gathered for a debrief. Daniel and I reviewed the cases, planned future workshops, and discussed outreach efforts. "Mom," Daniel said thoughtfully, "we are not just helping widows, we are changing the narrative. We are showing the world that women can protect themselves, learn, and build a future even after immense loss." I nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "Exactly. And that is the ultimate lesson: strength is not given, it is created. Knowledge is not inherited, it is earned. And hope is not found, it is cultivated." Later that week, we launched our first online session, sharing stories of resilience, legal strategies, and emotional empowerment. I looked into the camera and spoke directly to viewers. If you have ever felt powerless, if someone tried to take advantage of your loss or manipulate you, know that you are not alone. There is a path to reclaim your life, your dignity, and your inheritance. You are stronger than you think, and the right support can change everything. Comments began pouring in almost immediately, women from across the country sharing their own stories, their fears, and their victories. Some wrote that they had never considered fighting back until hearing our story. Others expressed relief that there was a safe space to seek guidance and support. By the end of the week, the center had expanded its programs to include financial literacy workshops, psychological counseling sessions, and community networking events. Each initiative reinforced a critical lesson: empowerment comes from knowledge, preparation, and support. We had turned personal pain into a system that protected and uplifted hundreds of women. One afternoon, a woman named Eleanor walked in, frail but determined. Her story mirrored mine in so many ways. A young daughter-in-law had quickly married her son after her husband's death and pressured her into relinquishing control of the estate. Tears ran down her cheeks as she whispered, "I don't want to lose my son to manipulation like I almost lost everything." I held her hands and said firmly, "Eleanor, it is not too late. With guidance and courage, you can reclaim your rights and protect your family. Today, we begin the process of taking back your power." By the end of the session, Eleanor was smiling, holding her head high, ready to face the legal challenges ahead. That night, Daniel and I sat together, reflecting on how far the center had come. "Mom," he said softly, "these women are no longer just clients. They are warriors in their own right. Every case we handle is a lesson in courage, resilience, and justice." I smiled, realizing that this was the legacy Caleb had envisioned, a life of protection, empowerment, and love transformed into tangible action. As I prepared for bed that night, I reflected on the key lessons of our journey, not just for widows but for everyone who had faced betrayal, loss, or manipulation. First, knowledge is power. Without understanding your rights, you are vulnerable, no matter how strong you feel. Second, resilience is cultivated. Pain can break you, or it can guide you to strength if you choose to learn from it. Third, love protects. It is not always about affection or closeness but about actions, guidance, and safeguarding those you care about. Finally, I looked into the bronze box, running my fingers over its engraved surface, and whispered, "Caleb, we are not just surviving, we are thriving. We are teaching others to rise, to protect, and to love themselves fiercely. This is your legacy, and we are fulfilling it." I turned to Daniel, who had been silently listening. "We have a responsibility," I said. "Not just to these women, but to anyone who feels powerless. To show them that their strength is already within them, waiting to be claimed." To everyone watching, reading, or listening, the message is clear: your value is not measured by wealth, by approval, or by what others take from you. Your value is in your courage to rise, your determination to protect yourself, and your commitment to help others along the way. Don't wait for someone to save you. Arm yourself with knowledge, surround yourself with support, and never let fear dictate your choices. If this story resonates with you, if you have faced manipulation, loss, or betrayal, share your experiences in the comments. Let us learn together, lift each other, and prove that resilience is contagious. Subscribe to the channel for weekly stories of real-life courage, wisdom, and triumph. Turn on notifications so you never miss a lesson that could change your life. Every story shared, every experience voiced, strengthens the collective power of those who refuse to be broken. That night, I slept with a sense of peace and purpose that I had never known before. I was no longer the widow who had once been manipulated, threatened, and isolated. I was a woman who had taken her pain, her loss, and her fear, and transformed it into a force for good. I had rebuilt my life, restored my son, and created a sanctuary for countless others. And as I closed my eyes, I understood that the greatest legacy we can leave is not money, not titles, not recognition. It is the empowerment of others, the protection of the vulnerable, and the courage to rise after every fall.